Happy New Year and welcome to Arts Alive, the arts programme here on Bay TV. Today we're in this amazing Port Sunlight village, the result of the philanthropist Lord Leverhulme making this incredible venue for his workers to live and work in. We're outside the Lady Lever Art Gallery. There's something remarkable exhibition going on here at the moment. You remember Maggie Smith as the Dowager Duchess of Grantham in Downton Abbey? Well, now you've got the chance to come and see some of the incredible costumes that she wore and other characters wore in this series. Come and look. Pauline, welcome to Arts Alive, the arts programme.
Thank you.
You're the curator of, was it costumes and what's your full title?
Costume textiles, yeah. I look after a collection of about 20,000 items and they cover about 300 years of fashion history. So it's an incredible range of material that we have here at the museums.
And you must have a monster job of actually conservation, because a lot of this stuff is quite elderly by now.
Well, we do have a conservation department, yes, and we do have people who can work on the costumes from time to time. But we try to prevent the problems of conservation by accepting things which are not in terrible condition in the first instance. Obviously, we're looking for things which are in pretty good condition to add to the collection, because we don't really want to give ourselves a problem in the long term.
What about the atmospheric conditions in which you keep things? Because that must be very, very important.
We do look after them in a particular store. They're all kept in the dark because light is very tricky. It's a very difficult thing. If things are kept in the light, they fade, obviously, as they would at home if you kept your own clothes in the light. So they're kept in the dark in large wardrobes, which are custom made for them. And they're kept at a particular relative humidity level and temperature as well. So we do have certain things that we have to think about in terms of storing the clothes.
So, the Downton exhibition, remarkable selection of costumes.
It's been a fantastic collection to work on, just to be able to have access to the things that were worn by the characters that we know and love from the Downton exhibition, the Downton show rather. The show it's a mixture of two things. It's the Downton exhibition about the Downton collection, which is on hire to us from Cosprop. Cosprop is the biggest UK maker, hirer of theatrical costumes for TV, film and the theatre. And they have been the people largely behind the Downton show. So we've borrowed some things from them, but we've added our own collection in there as well. So we have costumes which belong to the historic collection in the museums. We tried to marry the two things together. And they cover the period between about 1912 and 1923, which is what Downton's covered so far.
What is interesting is to see some of the costumes that are so familiar from the television. I can see Maggie Smith in that wonderful hat.
That's right. We do have the big characters covered in there. So we've got Maggie Smith, we've got Michelle Dockery as Lady Mary, of course. We've got Shirley MacLaine's outfit in there as the formidable.
Yes, I saw that.
That was American.
That was from the Christmas special.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, she's the mother-in-law, the American mother-in-law, and so of course she's quite a different character to the others in that she's quite. She's new and modern, she has modern ideas and so on, and that's kind of, it's not reflected in her clothes because she wears things appropriate to the character, but it's great to have a garment worn by such a big well-known actress as Shirley MacLaine in the exhibition.
So how have your visitors responded? Because I was amazed when I saw them this morning. How have they responded to the collection?
Well, we've had a fantastic response. Our visitor figures over the course of the exhibition from October have gone up by almost 80% on what they normally are at this time of the year. So
it's a huge leap.
It's a massive, fantastically positive feedback, and we've had lots of very good comments about the show. People do like costume shows anyway, but this particular show has got the added kudos in a way of having the Downton ideas behind it. So people have been extra specially drawn to it, I think.
So Cosprop, you say they're the biggest costume suppliers.
They're one of the biggest costume suppliers in the UK for theatre and TV and film.
What I was interested to see was they're not, I imagined they're all going to be absolutely new, but they've actually used a lot of old fabrics.
They do a combination of things. They can make things from you that look older. They take a lot of original clothes and they can customise them, make them different in some way. They add things to them or take them away. Things to make them look good on screen, because there are lots of tricks of the trade, obviously, that they know, that they can get around. If there's a problem with a dress, it may have a rip in a certain place or it may be deteriorated. They can change that so that it still looks good on screen and you don't see those flaws. It's all part of the history of the dress in a way.
I suppose they've got to be careful with things like putting a zip in the wrong place, because they may not have had zips.
Absolutely, and this would all these clothes would have fastened with hooks and eyes, so there wouldn't be any zips at this point between 1912 and 1923, so you wouldn't have found them, no.
I'm guessing as well, these days of high-definition television, the attention to detail has got to be perfection.
It definitely has. You really do see things in detail. And the thing about this show is that you can see these things close up in detail. They're not behind glass. They're obviously on open display, but protected. And people can really get close to the characters that they're most interested in, I think, if they come along and see.
One thing I was fascinated to see, there's also another personality represented in the exhibition. This lady from Liverpool, very special lady, her dress collection.
That's right. There is one garment in there that belonged to a lady called Emily Tinney. And we've done 3 exhibitions about Emily Tinney now. She's become very popular in Liverpool in particular. And I think it's fair to say that she could be described as the world's first known shopaholic. In fact, she had a huge collection of clothes. And again, from this period that Downton covers in many ways, she married in 1910. She married into money in Liverpool, Liverpool's sugar merchant family. And for the next 20 years or so, she basically just went crazy on the shopping front, and she bought masses of clothes in the Liverpool shops. She had things made for her as well. But up until the outbreak of war in 1939, she amassed an enormous amount of clothing, which luckily was given to us later on in the 1960s and more recently by her daughter. So we've got this fantastic collection of over 750 items.
My goodness.
She had many more than that, in fact. We didn't collect everything. So she's in the Downton show because one of her outfits is very typical of what they were wearing in Downton in one of the early series in about 1912, 1914. So she kind of pops up in various places ever since we first did her.
There's a nice story I heard about. She used to go and buy things in the Liverpool shops in order to give the sales assistants some commission.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. We can't.
What a nice person.
It is a fantastic story, but we can't really corroborate it. We don't have any firm background.
I want it to be true.
I know. I want it to be true as well. She apparently in the late 20s would buy fur coats in particular because they were so expensive, and in that way you would give the sales girls the biggest commission that you could do, because they would be the most expensive things they would be selling. At that point, with the recession on in the late 20s, people would be paid a very small salary and would depend upon the commission, really. So that was her way of giving charity.
So this would have been the grand shops of Bold Street in the old days.
It was, and all of the department stores as well. So, yeah, she was shopping from the top end of the market right down to the bottom. She wasn't snobby about it. She would shop wherever it took her fancy.
And so, Pauline, when does the exhibition run until?
Well, we've got until the 18th of January, so people can still see it until then. So a few more weeks to go.
Well worth seeing. Well, when we go to the break now, after the break, we're going to take you and show you one of our first 10-minute Tates. It's a look at a certain artwork at the Tate Gallery. So from the Lady Lever, see you soon. Welcome back to Arts Alive, the arts programme. We're going to go and look now at the work of someone who's been nicknamed Jack the Dripper. You imagine this idea of this crazy artist heaving paint around and sliding around on a canvas on the floor. Well, this is exactly the technique that was evolved by Jackson Pollock. Come and look.
We're looking here at one of the most famous abstract painters of the 20th century, Jackson Pollock, or Jack the Dripper, as he was known, as Time magazine called him in the 1950s. This painting was done in 1948, and I'm aware that a lot of people have trouble with abstract art. Abstract art tends to divide people. My mum always says, when she sees this painting, she always says, oh, why do you have such weird art in the Tate, she always says. And I say, well, Mum, think of art in the same way you might think of music. That if you think of art as music for your eyes, then art, you don't particularly have to be clever or intelligent to enjoy abstract art. We all accept that music can be about something, but equally, music can be about nothing at all. It can be a composition, a rhythm, a melody. And sometimes music is very carefully composed and worked out and calculated, and sometimes music is very improvised, such as jazz music can be very improvised. In 1948, in New York, the main music at the time would be very improvised jazz music. Jackson Pollock, you could see as a piece of music for your eyes, if you like, that it's very improvised. And again, just as music can be about something, but it doesn't have to be, so can art. Art can be about something. It can be a landscape, it can be a portrait, it can be a still life, but equally, it can be a composition of colour and shape, or whatever it might be. The way Jackson Pollock did this painting was he put the canvas on the floor. It was actually outdoors. It was done in the summertime, and it's actually called summertime as well. So it was done outdoors. The canvas was loose on the ground, so not all stretched as it is now, and not framed as it is now. So you would be able to attack the canvas from either side. There was no top, middle, or bottom. We normally think of the artist with an easel, and there's the top of the canvas, and there's the bottom of the canvas. Well, he'd attack the canvas from either side here. And you might think there was no system, and that this painting is completely random. Well, there is an element of chance in this painting, but there was also a system. The performance, if you like, that Jackson Pollock would do to make this painting was he'd run round the canvas, walk around the canvas with a tin of paint and also a stick, and he would dip the stick in the paint and then he would flick the paint onto the canvas. Sometimes he might use a brush, but none of your delicate brushes, none of your nice little kind of thin brushes. He would often use a very thick brush that would just hold the paint so he could then flick it. If you look at the black bits in this painting, you can see that there is a sort of system, there's a sort of rhythm to the movement that he makes as he goes across the canvas, like a sort of dance. If you think of yourself dancing, one part of dancing is getting the steps right and keeping the discipline going, but the other part of dance is also letting yourself go and having a bit of spirit about you and a bit of freedom about you. And I think that's what's happening here. So there is a rhythm, there's a strict sort of rhythm, there's a definite pattern to the black bits across the canvas here, but also there's the element of chance. There are other things that are making this painting. Gravity is making the painting. The way the paint itself behaves is making this painting. The fact that he did it outdoors might determine how this painting has been done as well. So as well as the art is making this painting, there's also the element of chance, the element of gravity, the element of the weather coming in as well. If you look at the yellow bits and you look at the blue bits as well, there's a kind of rhythm going across the canvas again in that way. The yellow bits, of course, would be deliberately coloured in, if you like. The same with the blue bits as well, and the little red bits and purple bits. And they've been deliberately coloured in, but of course the lines surrounding those coloured bits, creating this spatial planes of yellow and blue, those lines would be done randomly. They would be done by flicking and splashing and dripping the paint. Eventually, he signs the painting in the top left-hand corner there, so that ends up being the top, and this ends up being the bottom. A lot of people look at this painting in a kind of figurative way. I was talking to some children about this painting the other week, and they said they thought the black bits of the painting looked like dancing figures, and that the yellow and the blue bits of the painting looked like flags or material being waved, like in a carnival or something, which I think that's fine. I think Jackson Pollock meant it as a completely abstract painting, but sometimes people want to read kind of figurative things into it. If you see it as a figurative painting, or if you see it as a completely abstract painting, either way, this painting is about movement, it's about energy, it's about a dynamic sort of liveliness. It's not about a kind of dead, still painting, it's a painting that's full of life. As you're looking at this painting, as I'm looking at it now, I can almost imagine Jackson Pollock doing this painting as a kind of performance, where I'm with him when he's doing the performance there. The things that influenced Jackson Pollock when he was becoming this sort of artist, you might think, oh, he's a modern artist, and in many ways, of course, he was a modern artist. Doing this in 1948 was a new thing to do in art in New York. But he was also looking at art of what we might think of as American natives as well, what we used to call Red Indians when I was a boy, and probably what Jackson Pollock would have called Red Indians. But he loved the art of the totem poles, for example, that sort of folk art, and his early figurative art looks a bit like that. But later he gets interested in something else that the American natives were doing, which was sand painting. And sand painting, even now, a lot of American natives will do it, which is sand painting, which is paintings, again, done on the floor, and again, relying on gravity to hold the sand in place, and often using different coloured sand in different areas on the floor. And sometimes, again, that can be very carefully worked out as a composition. Sometimes it can be random and sprinkled. Sometimes, as well, you might use a stick to draw into the sand as well. So, as is so often the case, there's often a link, I think, between what we might think of as modern art and what we might think of as primitive art, or untrained art, if you like, or folk art. And I think there's a link there. And I think the performance element of that culture as well comes into the way he's done this painting. There's almost a kind of shaman-like way of making a painting like this. Jackson Pollock is one of the most famous modern artists, one of the most famous painters of the 20th century. And you might ask, well, why has he decided to do this with paint? Well, normally, if we were sat here 300 or 400 years ago and I wanted a picture of you, the only way I could get a picture of you 300 or 400 years ago is to get an artist to sit down and draw you or paint you. And especially in an age before photography, in an age before film, it would be important to make my painting look realistic, or what we might say naturalistic. So my role as an artist would be to visually record the world, especially in an age before photography. I think since photography, a lot of artists have questioned the traditional use of their materials. If the camera can visually record the world, what can I do with paints that the camera can't do? And a lot of artists, especially the Impressionists, became freer with the paint. If you look at Impressionist painting, you're not only enjoying the subject matter of the painting, you're also enjoying the paint itself. You may even see bits of bare canvas showing through the paint. And if artists throughout the 20th century are becoming more and more abstract and more expressive with the paint, then it's only inevitable that eventually we come up with something called abstract expressionism. And in America, Jackson Pollock was the pioneer of abstract expressionism. So in a way, it's quite a romantic idea of the artist, really, because or a poet or an artist. It's the idea of this creative person expressing themselves, kind of bearing their soul on the canvas, that what we see outwardly is kind of something from some kind of inner creativity sort of thing, you know. So no longer is paint here a means of seeing something else. No longer is the painting trying to be an illusion about something else somewhere else. This painting is about the paint itself. The paint is the subject of the artwork. It's not an illusion. It's not some kind of... it's also, we can see bits of bare canvas showing through the paint. So we're very aware of the materials and we're very aware of the process. So there's no hiding that here. Again, if you think of it like music, some people might not like this. You know, my grandma, for example, if she listens to hip-hop music, she's not used to it, so she's going to find it a little bit strange. If I took my grandma to a rave, she would think it was a completely ridiculous thing to do. What are they all doing? And scratching records, why can't they play proper music? Rapping, why can't they sing properly? But if you're used to it, and it's part of your life, then it's okay. And I think the key to looking at this sort of art is to not be like your grandma, basically, is to kind of have an open mind. And just as we've opened our mind in other things like music, then we can do that with art as well. Jackson Pollock, in some ways, could be deemed quite a traditional artist in the Tate, because it's still oil on canvas, it's still painting. There are many, many artists doing all kinds of different things in this day and age. So my mum would see this as strange modern art, but to me, I see it as quite traditional art because it's oil on canvas and it's a painting. These ideas are now making their way into mainstream taste, I think. You can probably go to IKEA now and buy reproductions of Jackson Pollock paintings. So it's making its way, whereas once it was a dangerous new thing. But I always remember, you know, Elvis was once deemed dangerous and new, whereas now I think we see him as a mainstream musician and singer. And I think it's often the case with art, often the case with music, that things can seem strange if you're not used to them. But the more you get into it, the more you get from it. And I actually prefer the liveliness and the energy of this sort of art to earlier art. You could argue that earlier art is a better display of skill and a better display of craft and skill, which, don't get me wrong, I love craft and skill. But sometimes other things might be going on as well as craft and skill. And I do think there's something going on in here. Think of the Beatles. I learned how to write a song. It's a very catchy song and it gets to #1. later Beatles, they start to say, well, what happens if we play this record backwards? If I drop this pen, is that the same as playing the drums? So a lot of these artists have been trained in what we might call the Western European classical tradition, but then they've questioned their training and started to almost get rid of their training to find a new language in art.
And you see why Jackson Pollock was known as not a picture, but an arena, a place in which to act. The act of creating the picture is very much part of the work itself. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Arts Alive, the arts programme.